Hello, thank you for watching Taxpayer Alert. I'm Segalla. I'll be your moderator at this session. This is our 17th episode. Our guest at this showing is Rebecca Callen, our county auditor. Rebecca is also a candidate for her own job with no opposition, so she doesn't have to worry about campaigning too much, but she's been hard at work. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Rebecca, let's talk a little bit about you. What's it been like being an auditor for the last 3 years?
It's been a lot of work. There's been a lot of changes in local government and throughout the state. So a lot of monumental changes, everything from realignment, changes in funding structures, different grants, ending grants, changes in budget, changes in reporting, and I got to be part of all of them.
Oh boy, it seemed like a little bit of stress involved with that position.
There is, but we have a really good team in the auditor's office, so we work very well together and we work very well with other departments. We try to collaborate as much as possible and we try to reach out to other counties. We're a small county, so we're not generally the ones that are inventing the wheel. So we try to look at how other counties have potentially already dealt and addressed with certain situations and take the best practices where we can find them.
Well, that's interesting. Also, I have noticed how well your department works with the other ones. You're kind of like a team, even though you're individually elected.
Yes.
And sometimes the supervisors don't totally agree with the other elected officials, but perhaps it's a good thing that they are separately elected, so you can be more responsive to the public and to the taxpayers.
Yeah, so sometimes I jokingly say that I do understand why I'm elected. I do understand why a lot of these positions are elected. And in my case, you know, there has been some controversies while I've been in office, and I have brought those things to light. And I kind of jokingly say that if I was appointed, I might not have a job anymore. But because I'm elected, the taxpayers have appreciated it. So.
Yeah, I know we certainly do. I guess probably the biggest challenge is the budget. I'm sure you have other challenges too, and let's give a little background on taxation. Most of your income comes from
the majority of the county's income. There's basically three of our major sources. There's state money, there's federal money, and there's property taxes. That's where the bulk of our revenues come in. Now, when we're talking about state and federal revenues are generally grant allocations, is what we'll see. When we're talking about state revenues, those are generally tied to sales tax, statewide sales tax. So that could be anything from public safety money to the realignment money that's funding the AB 109 program. We also have just a multitude of other revenues that come to us, but they really are hinged on statewide sales tax. Our local property tax, that's the 1% that you pay when you pay your property tax bill. Sometimes I think that there's a little confusion because when you write that check to the treasurer tax collector, you think, you know, you're paying all this money and you are paying a lot of money, but the reality is only about 17 cents on the dollar goes to county, and that is to pay for my office, the sheriff's department, the libraries, roads, you know, all of the activities that go on at the county, 17 cents on the dollar. A majority of the funding goes to our schools from the property taxes, and then the remainder goes to the special districts. So fire districts, cemetery districts, all of the various districts that we have out there. So those really are our bread and butter type revenues. And so we don't have a lot of control on those revenues. We don't dictate to the state how much they're going to give us. We don't dictate to the feds how much they're going to give us. And we certainly don't dictate, it's 1%. 1% no matter what. So that is completely tied to whatever the assessed value is. And we know that assessed values have been declining over the last several years.
2005, I think.
Yes. So we don't control that either. So of the monies that we do control locally, there's very small portions that we actually control locally.
Do we get gas tax money? When we buy gas, we give the state and the federal government a lot of money.
Yes, so the gas tax comes back to us in a couple of ways. One is through the agricultural department, and it also comes to us through the public works department.
I see. You mentioned the different pots where this money comes from. The federal government seems to be having a problem with its budget, and I understand we've passed $17.5 trillion deficit now, and it may come perhaps sooner rather than later where an accounting nature will bring about an accounting. And so I guess the question is, if that should happen, what would the effect be to our county? How much of our county is dependent upon money coming from the federal government if it no longer could give us money?
Well, the problem is that direct funding from federal government is actually not that much that we get. But what we tend to see is that as the federal government starts shrinking its abilities to spend, it actually impacts the state government. And then when the state government is hurting for money, who do they look to? They look to local.
Yeah.
So
they're bigger than you are.
Yes, exactly. And they can tell us what to do and what not to do. So through the legislation that they pass. Right. So unfortunately, sometimes we don't necessarily have a direct correlation between the federal government and our local county. What we'll actually see is a deferral of revenues from the state to the county. That's what happens, and because everything kind of just flows downhill. So as the state starts getting less money from the federal government, then we will start getting less money from the state.
You may not, this question of course, is not part of your office, but do you happen to know how much of the state budget it's dependent upon the federal government? And is the federal government a fairly large hunk of the state money? Or?
That I'm not really sure.
That was not a good question. Sorry. Okay, so if the federal government reduced or stopped its payments to the state, we're not sure what the consequences would be, but there would be consequences for the local counties because the state would turn
two of the
local.
biggest factors with regards to state money and federal money which then flows down to local has to do with transportation and road projects, and also with welfare programs, so social services programs. That's where you'll tend to see the expansion or shrinkage depending on what's happening at the federal level, and then what will happen at the state, and then that flows down to us. So those are the two kind of areas of business that get impacted, roads and health and human services.
What percentage of our county budget is in the welfare category?
I'm not
Roughly.
positive. I don't have that number off the top of my head. But they get very little general fund money. We do have a maintenance of effort that we're required to give them, and that's a few $100,000 a year. And then for the roads, we do also give the road department general fund money, which last year it was about $586,000, something roughly about that. But in terms of what their annual budget is, it's complicated because, for instance, a lot of the road has to do with capital projects. Right. So it depends on what the projects are going to be for the particular year. I will tell you that because funding overall has been declining for roads, most of the money that's been coming into roads is tied to projects, capital projects for roads. Okay. Or bridge projects, which means there's very little money for maintenance of roads.
I see.
And so, when our constituents get frustrated with the the gigantic potholes or the washouts or whatever it is, there literally is hardly any money for the amount of county maintained roads that we're supposed to be maintaining.
I understand there's a number of roads that are not county maintained now. They have these districts, CSAs, that where the people are taxed on their tax bill above the 1% to pay for their own road maintenance
Yes, so you've got CSAs and CSDs. So some of them get a portion of the property taxes. Some of them actually have special assessments that are, that's their primary source of income, is through those special assessments on the tax bills. And those really are there to maintain those roads. It's kind of a new concept. It's only been around, it's still been around for a while, but in terms of how long we've had roads in Calaveras County, it's relatively a new concept. So I think that it's a good idea, because we realized a while ago that there just wasn't money if on the 1% of property taxes, if the county only gets 17 cents on the dollar, there's really not a lot of money to go to maintaining roads when you have competing interests. When you're talking about deputies on the street, or maintaining a road, or a library, or whatever the other competing interest is, those are all the things that the board has to determine what their priorities are going to be. So we've been looking at better ways of doing this. So for instance, there was a permanent road division that was formulated, I think, 2 years ago. And that was a new concept, but we're really trying to ensure that any future roads actually have a funding mechanism tied to them.
How would the new road division work?
It's not really a road division. What it is it's a funding source. So it's tied to the assessed parcels that would be utilizing those roads.
Oh, for the user pay.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Yeah, we agree with that concept.
Yep. So if you're going to use it, you're going to pay for it.
You mentioned a word, I think it was realignment. Can you tell us a little bit about what's realignment?
So the realignment had to do with the movement of the, well, there was a lot of realignment, but in terms of what you hear mostly locally with realignment, has to do with the transition from the incarceration at the state jails to local jails, and also from going from parolee to probation. So with that came a pot of money, certainly not enough money to actually pay for everything that we needed to do, but it has been kind of an ideological change and a shift in what we do locally. So clearly, it's new. It's new to the state of California. It's not new to the United States, but it certainly is new to the state of California. And so there's been a lot of collaborative meetings going on to determine what's the best way to spend this pot of money. It was constitutionally guaranteed, the funding source. The state, unfortunately, sometimes they will push down a mandate and they will pay for it for a little while, and then you're stuck with the mandate, but you don't have any money to go with it. They did constitutionally guarantee it when Prop 30 passed. So the funding is constitutionally guaranteed. At what level, that's kind of the sticky part. But we are all working together to decide how that's best going to be handled going forward.
Okay, now the biggest challenge we have coming, I guess, this next month to start our
Budgets.
Budget review, and I think we have $8.1 million in red.
So at the point that we were projecting everything for 13-14 going forward, we had a gap. And so it's pretty simple math. So you've got your inflows and you've got your outflows.
I have that in my budget too.
Yeah, so it's just kind of household budgeting 101. Our inflows were less than what our outflows were going to be. And at the point that we looked at it, it was about $8 million. And that's just not really sustainable.
Right.
Some of that we're looking at, and some of those are one-time costs, so those will drop off. Some of them are costs that will go away in maybe 2 years, but the bulk of it is still there. And how we got into that position is the fact that we have consistently, over a multitude of budget years, used one-time funding. Right. And then you just assume that that one-time funding is going to be there next year. Well, one-time funding is one-time funding.
Right.
So you can't guarantee that it's going to be there next year. And I think that it's hard because we've gone through so many years of reductions. And, we got hit extra hard here because our assessed values really went in the toilet. The economy was just decimated. So we got hit from property taxes, we got hit from state revenue reductions, federal revenue reductions, sales tax reductions. We got hit every which way that you could possibly get hit. Meanwhile, our costs were going up. So even though we made some cost reductions, it wasn't to the extent that we needed to over the multitude of years that we've been trying to shrink. And the reality is, I think we just need to get to a new normal, and we're not really sure what that new normal is. And we know that it's just going to be smaller. There's been a lot of discussion about revenue generation and how you create more revenue. And there's been a lot of focus on, well, economic development is the answer. But we don't get that much money. You don't start a business so that you can give your profits to the county.
Right.
You know, it definitely is good for the community, it's good for the economy, but it doesn't necessarily translate to dollars to local government. We're limited on property taxes and sales tax.
What is the picture in property tax? I understand that home prices, of course, home prices are almost subsidized by the low interest rates, which may not last that much longer. But I understand home prices have gone up somewhat. Has that started to take effect on the assessment rolls? Do you know?
I'm not sure yet. So we're continuing to get roll corrections. The assessor will tell you the moment that she certifies the roll, it starts changing as soon as the ink starts drying.
Right.
So
it's a moving target.
It's a moving target. So it's only certified for that moment in time, and then from that moment going forward, it is changing. So she will be certifying that roll at the end of this fiscal year, and that's when we'll know what her assessed values are going to be. And that's what we'll base our taxes are for 14-15. As far as what that's going to be,
don't know yet.
We don't know yet.
Okay. The one of the questions, of course, is if you have to reduce spending, it's very difficult for elected supervisors to talk about that, because if you talk about reducing something that somebody wants, you can lose votes.
It's very unpopular.
Yeah.
And no one is going to be exceptionally happy because someone is going to lose.
Yeah.
Someone's going to lose something.
Right.
You're going to have reductions in service or reductions in personnel or whatever it is, or you're going to have deferred replacements of equipment. There's a multitude of decisions that are going to have to be made, and none of them are popular.
Right.
None of them are popular. And unfortunately, we don't have an endless supply of one-time funds. So there's only so long we can kick the can before someone comes knocking on the door.
Right. And who would that someone be?
Well, I think that there's been discussion that there's no possible way, it'll ever get that bad and everything will get resolved, and how bad will it really get? And, again, it kind of comes back to household budgeting 101. At some point, there's just no money in your checking account.
Right.
And in our case, it's a little bit different, but there are different classifications of money that the county has. And we do, you'll hear people say, oh, we have over $100 million in the treasury, and we do. That's a lot of money. It's not all ours. We hold money for special districts, we hold money for school districts, we hold money for the state, we hold money for the federal government. So you have to remember that the money that we are holding is not all ours. Right. The money that is under the governance of our Board of Supervisors, I just did a report to the treasurer. It's about $66 million total. That's for the entire county. That includes money that we are holding for the state that is basically restricted funding that we can't spend on anything other than what the state tells us we can spend it on. And if we spend it on anything other than that, they're going to ask for it back.
Oh,
So
we'll be in trouble then.
you will be in big trouble. So you kind of have to just acknowledge that unless you're going to spend it on that, it's off the table. So in terms of, and also a very small portion of that is actually general fund. Most of that money is integrated waste. It's the road department, it's the welfare department, it's mental health. So you have to kind of start scraping back the layers of what does that $100 million represent. And there's really not that much money that is under the governance of the board that we have the ability to freely spend. There just really isn't. So there's going to be a lot of decisions that are going to have to be made. But ultimately, what will happen is I'll run out of resources to pay bills. And we'll have to prioritize what bills do we pay.
Right. I've faced that myself.
Yes, you do. And that's why I say it's very simple math. So it's just like the household. You have to prioritize, well, do I pay the cable bill or do I pay the mortgage? Do I buy food or do I keep the power on? So there'll be, if we continue to defer and not make the decisions that need to be made, which and I don't take it lightly, are very difficult decisions, agonizing decisions, then we eventually will run into that.
What percentage of our budget or expenses are composed of salaries?
It is a huge percentage of our budget. If you just look at the general fund,
Yes.
A huge portion of the general fund is salaries and benefits. It's over 60%.
Okay. One of the proposals that might be made would be deferment, like the state does to the counties do to their employees, rather than terminate people, if you expect that we're going to recover, rather than let people go, ask for a reduction. And maybe not a pay cut, maybe a suspension where the money could be returned when if the county does recover.
So the issue whenever you get involved in anything personnel related is it's all labor negotiations and it's all meet and confer. And the laws have changed with regards to any labor negotiations. It's a very long, drawn out process. So it's not something that would happen overnight. It would be something that could potentially take 2 years. Certainly it's something that, when we say put everything on the table, everything should be on the table, but it's not something that we would be able to, say, okay, by July 1st, this is what's going to happen, because it literally could take 2 years in order for anything to happen of substance. But it is a substantial percentage of our budget, yes.
So do the agreements with the unions allow for reductions based on emergency?
No.
By not having funds available?
No.
So then you're left with the alternative of termination. That's all you can do is start bumping people.
And in some cases, that's where we're at. And in some cases, departments are deferring that decision and finding one-time funds again to go through 14-15, and then 15-16, that's when it's going to be a drop-off. So I took a different approach. I looked at my department and what we were going to be able to do and what we had control over, and I've made different decisions, for the health of my department and for the health of the county on what we could do. So I'm making decisions with my staffing levels in 14-15 that will help protect the rest of my department through 15-16 and hopefully 16-17. But every department had to make that decision on how they were going to do that and what they were going to bring forth to the Board of Supervisors.
Right. I understand how tough this is. I used to be in civil service one time myself. And so if the unions were faced with a choice of either having permanent terminations or salary reductions, it seemed like they might be leaning more toward keeping the people and then having temporary salary reduction. I don't know. That can even be done.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think that because this is still the first year of the major reductions that we're making, we are still utilizing a significant amount of one-time funding in the recommendation of the 14-15 budget. So you're going to see very little reductions in staffing for 14-15 because in some ways we're still deferring. So I think where you're going to see the issues kind of arise is in 15-16.
I saw an article in the paper where the schools, one school district gave raises to
Yes, they did.
in spite of a budget problem.
Yep.
And our little taxpayer group didn't have a committee on schools formed yet to try to get involved with that, but one of these days we will.
Yeah, I saw that, and I saw that his hope is that there will be additional revenue on the horizon for them. So
The other things that are possible is prioritizing government spending reductions based on the importance of the entity or the department. Some departments might be able to be operated privately, and other departments couldn't be. Some are very important, like law enforcement and your job and people and the tax collector and the county recorder. Those
Yep.
type of things have to be there.
yeah, some of the issues that we run into in the privatizing is the laws.
State laws.
Is state laws, and there are government code laws that restrict privatizing certain activities that were done by staff. And so even though it may be cheaper to contract out,
Right.
you can't replace a staff person with a contract because of cost. Now, does that make sense?
No.
Not necessarily, but it's the law. And until some of that legislation gets changed, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a really hard place.
Okay, if you had, well, I understand there's a plan to try to get back in budget in 3 years. Is that still a plan?
That's still the plan. So
Okay.
we've worked diligently with departments to try to get, squeeze blood out of a turnip and try to get as much reductions as we possibly can. We're actively pursuing any revenues that we possibly can. I know that they're actively looking at renegotiating contracts for services where we're getting revenue for those services, also looking at our grants. We're looking at tightening things up. We're looking at consolidations. We're looking at sharing jobs. I mean, we're looking at things in a very creative way. So definitely we're looking at anything that will reduce those costs because we know that we have to continue to go in that direction.
Now, if you had a magic wand and the happy cooperation of everyone, what would you bring about? That's a hard one.
That is a hard one. Well, everything would just cost less and we would just have more money. So
Oh, okay. All right, I guess that would work. One of the things that, this is so enjoyable. The taxpayers and the public get a chance to look inside what's happening in government with our program. One of the things that we find satisfying to us is being able to provide the service. And we want to thank you for watching Taxpayer Alert, and we hope that you'll join us again. And thank you for coming.
thank you very much.